Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you are. I've been challenged a number of times um, to say what is going to happen with the 2023 elections. My position is that we are not going to stop Zanu PF rigging these elections. And we are not going to stop Triple C participating in these flawed elections. What we can do is stop the regime getting legitimacy at the end of the day. It is important to appreciate that subtle difference. As much as I would have wanted to see Zimbabwe hold free, fair, and credible elections so that we could all shout, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. The truth of the matter is, it's not going to happen. We have got to look at the reality. A wise man always acts within which that constrains him. We have got to identify what constrains us. We have a Zanu PF dictatorship created by Zanu, entrenched over the years by Zanu PF. And Zanu PF is not going to reform itself out of power. That is a fundamental reality that we've got to accept and to deal with. There's no point in us pretending we don't have a dictatorship. We have a dictatorship. We do not have free, fair, and credible elections. That is the reality. Between now and 2023, we cannot implement any meaningful reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. That is the argument. We cannot stop Zanu PF rigging these elections. It's too late now. We should have done it. In fact, the best option to have the reforms implemented was supposed to be carried out by MDC. The people of Zimbabwe have risked life and limb to elect MDC leaders into power on the understanding they would bring about democratic change. As the party name implies, movement for democratic change. The reality we have as of now is that MDC has failed to implement even one meaningful reform in 23 years, 5 of which they were in the GNU. MDC is now working for Zanu PF. They have sold out so much when they had the golden opportunity to implement the reforms during the GNU of 2008 to 2018. They failed to implement even one meaningful reform because of greed. And this is not just me saying it. They themselves admit it. The evidence on the ground says the same thing. This is a book by David Coulthard for those who would want to check it for themselves. And in the book, Coulthard readily admits that MDC failed to implement the reforms, and the rational reason for it was greed. We can argue all we want. And in fact, I think some people love arguing endlessly about it and deny, but there it is in black and white. MDC would not do the right thing in 2013 of boycotting the 2013 elections because they were so flawed and so illegal. The logical step was to withdraw, but they could not do it because they could not resist the few gravy trains that Zanu PF was offering to those who were willing to participate. And it is this greed that has kept MDC guys imprisoned. Whether we like to admit it or not, that is the reality. MDC guys are now prisoners of their own failure. In fact, a cartoon the other day depicted it as Nelson Chamisa going into a boxing ring with Zanu PF when he's already bound up. He cannot fight back. And that is the truth. MDC is totally helpless to have any meaningful change in the election. And we cannot stop them. That is the other tragedy here. We cannot stop MDC participating in these elections. They are going to participate, knowing fully well that by participating, they're only giving Zanu PF legitimacy. So that is the reality. That is what constrains us. What can we do? What we can do is to make sure that the flawed elections, the flaws in the elections are exposed. And no one, particularly SADC, should pretend that they do not see those flaws. Elections, if they're going to be declared free, fair, and credible, you cannot have free, fair, and credible elections when you do not have, for instance, something as basic as a verified voters roll. When you've got violence, when the opposition cannot hold rallies, that should be emphasized. And we should also emphasize number two, that the opposition is not participating because they are a genuine, credible opposition. There are no longer a credible opposition in Zimbabwe. The Triple C is no longer a credible opposition. So to keep on pretending with, oh, you've got a credible opposition, if they participate, then the elections, we've got to accept the results, is totally unacceptable. And that we must emphasize to SADC. And armed with those two political realities, it is incumbent on us, the people of Zimbabwe, to make sure that Zanu PF does not get the legitimacy come the end of these elections, 2023. The advantage with that is that it will put us back into the same situation we were in 2008, when SADC refused to recognize Zanu PF as the legitimate government and forced them to form the GNU. We need a new GNU. I know some people, the minute you mention GNU, they reject it completely. As, oh, the last time was a waste of time. Of course it was a waste of time. But it wasn't the idea itself that the GNU you need to implement reforms. It's because it was a waste of time because MDC failed to implement the reforms. There is nothing complicated about the reforms. With the political will and common sense, we can implement those reforms so that we have free, fair, and credible elections. That is what we should be aiming for. If you cannot get the best you can. The best for Zimbabwe in 2023 would have been free, fair, and credible elections. We cannot get that. But the next best thing we can get is to make sure 2023 is the last rigged elections in Zimbabwe. Because at the end of it, deny Zanu PF legitimacy will force us back into another GNU. If we implement all the democratic reforms, then from there on, there's no reason why Zimbabwe should ever have another rigged election. That will get us back on track of implementing reforms and getting the democratic Zimbabwe back on track. That is what we should be aiming for. And that is tenable. And that is where we need to focus our minds. If you cannot get the best you can. That is the message I would like to leave with you tonight. And with that, thank you very much and good night.